user private data, advertising for personal data, and behavioral analysis of users in online platforms. He has published works in top-tier conferences such as TAP, KBD, and Sigmod. And today he is going to talk about cyberbullying and its detection. I pass the floor to Elias.
Thanks, Savas. So the stuff I will talk about today are some works we did with Despina and some others, Jeremy, Emiliano, Gianluca, and Athena, within NK's project. So in the past, I was at Yahoo, and now I'm in Telefonica. Some things I do revolve around distributed systems in general, peer-to-peer networks. I like graph mining in general, but if it has to do with distributed stream processing, it's also of my interest. And lately I've been getting into personal data privacy, real-time bidding, advertising, reverse engineering ads. And due to NKs, I've been working a lot on hate speech detection, cyberbullying detection, and also tracing fake news over different social media and how they propagate, how they expand, and so on. And some of these, so these are these three projects that I worked on in the European Union, and some of the institutions that I'm collaborating with. As I said, I work at Telefonica. In Telefonica, we have about 14 PhDs and a lot of visiting professors, students. We are located in Barcelona for the last 11 years, more or less. Main goal is to publish in academic venues, get patents for the company from the technology we build within these research projects. We participate in European and national projects, but also internal projects for the company. And the main, let's say, research areas that we work on have to do with, of course, networking systems. Telefonica is a telco operator, one of the big players, let's say, in the world, with 25 countries and 300 million subscribers. So we have network systems, machine learning, and UX, HCI. And at this point, primarily I work somewhere here in the intersection of these two fields. Now, in a case, I've been recently involved in different projects. This is primarily the one that we'll talk about today, cyberbullying and cyber aggression on Twitter. But we already published some works on this topic on 4chan. How many people know 4chan? Don't be shy, it's okay. It's something we need to know about. So we did a longitudinal analysis on 4chan and at least some effects that it has on the web. We analyzed how news propagate with through 4chan, Twitter, and Reddit. Savas is leading on that. And now we are exploring some other directions like image analysis and propagation of images that appear in this type of platforms, raids that may be happening, or not may, that are happening in platforms like YouTube, Twitter, Twitch, etc., that are orchestrated by these other platforms. Hate speech detection on Twitter, and honeypots on social media like Facebook or Twitter and so on. So, quick outline. Basically, I will give a motivation of this work, and generalized methodology that I tried to abstract that can help, hopefully, some of you that are going to work on a similar topic or the same topic, I don't know. An effort that we did to collect the data, comparison of aggressive users with some baseline users to understand how different they are, And then from there on, ground truth building, so that we can run machine learning algorithms to detect automatically cyberbullying and cyber aggression. And finally, I will close with a comparison of these results with how Twitter is responding to this problem, this, let's say, online plague, and some future directions that you may want to consider as well. So, if you try to define cyber aggression and cyberbullying, you can find some definitions. I'm trying to be playful here for something really bad on the web. So cyber aggression is basically when you're using electronic means to try to do some harm to a person or an individual or a group on the web. And this harm can be offensive or derogatory tweets or blog posts or Facebook messages, etc. Now, cyber aggression, you could consider it as a one-time thing. Now, when this is happening many times, and I put a question mark there because we don't really know when enough is enough and when this leads to cyberbullying. Okay, and why I phrase it like that is because for each individual that likes to cyberbully another individual or a group, they have their own reasons, right? It can be the fact that others that are bystanders are just watching and they get this feedback that, yeah, where you go, you're torturing this person or this whatever. Or it can be something more specific, like you get a satisfaction from for driving some person crazy, right? And the problem is that cyberbullying is manifesting on the web, but it also seeps into real life in the physical world. So the main difference, let's say, between cyber aggression and cyberbullying is that cyberbullying is happening repeatedly over time, and it does have this imbalance of power. So usually a person who is a little bit more popular or whatever, or they are perceived as popular on the web, they have this phenomenal power, let's say, to push messages or to say aggressive messages to a person with less power. And this happens constantly, right? What's the rate of such messages? Again, this really depends on platforms, depends on persons. So it can be something that happens over months, or it can be over a few days, right? We have seen examples on Twitter where somebody posts, for example, a message, and then everybody starts posting on top of that, and they bully them, right? This can happen within a few minutes if the platform allows it, or it can be a very slow process that keeps going on, and then that person may end up killing themselves, right? And we have lots of examples of these scenarios. For example, teenagers are very likely to experience cyberbullying. So at their school, about 3/4 of teenagers are basically experiencing or have seen it. High school students also electronically have been bullied in the past. Even kids, very young kids at grade 6 to 12, which is pretty sad, right? If you expect the kids that are in elementary school and they're bullying each other, is something that they see and they copy and they cultivate. Now, if you move into the online world, this becomes even harder because at school, let's say, things are manifesting physically, and you can see them and detect them and stop them. On the web, we have millions of websites that this may be happening. We have a huge variety of websites. So just earlier I mentioned 3 or 4 platforms, and they are all of different application domains, right? They work in a different way. Some are image boards like 4chan, some other are blog post type of platforms like Reddit. Twitter is a microblogging. So all these things change the way that it could be applied. We have different groups in the way they organize themselves. We have hashtags, for example, that can offend a big population of people if they are created and if they are promoted, right? Also, the perception of what is bullying or aggression is changing from country to country, which means culture to culture, right? And this is, it means that you cannot just create a system that works in US and come to Europe and try to run it. Or even in Europe, we have 30 different cultures. It's very difficult to apply it as such. And another problem is that this type of behaviors are transient. So now they happen, now they don't, right? So if somebody is a bully now, it doesn't mean that there will always be a bully. Maybe it was a phase in their life and they were posting messages to somebody else or to another group or whatever. There was a conglomerate of others and they bullied also that person. And then this is gone, right? If you don't have the means to detect it quickly and be accurate, you may lose it as a phenomenon or as an instance. It can disappear from your logs. I'm always talking about the electronic version, right? That's why it becomes very difficult to detect it or even measure it. So these are some of the questions that we wanted to address within this work. If you can detect abusers, how they are distinguished, how they are different from regular users, and can we use any of these properties that we have here to build a system, an automatic method to detect this behavior? And finally, if there is such a system that is detecting them, how does it compare with what we built? So moving to a, let's say, generalized methodology, which I hope it will help some of you. Again, you need to define your research question, of course. How many people here are working on research projects? They need to write a research paper, or they want to do a project where they have to collect data and analyze them? All right, so I think you will probably know this structure, but I hope it's helpful. So after you define your research question, you need to figure out what type of data you would want to analyze. This is, let's say, more in the data science kind of realm of things. To support your research question, or at least examine it, you need to have some data that will help you study your hypothesis, but also you need to have some sort of baseline data which will help you compare and confirm or reject your hypothesis. Usually, in a lot of sciences, these data are together, right? And then you just try to extract the differences between these characteristics. On the other hand, if you have the availability, you can collect them in a different way, in a separate way. As soon as you define what type of data you want, you go and fetch it. You go and crawl it. You build systems, scripts, whatever you need, infrastructure to go and pick it up. This again is on the online world, right? I'm not talking about surveys or this kind of stuff where you have to go manually and collect them. I'm talking about the web. And finally, when you have some data, you need to do some cleaning. You need to check to see if your data is trustworthy, right? Sometimes you involve a lot of biases by the way you collected your data, and they may be wired towards confirming your hypothesis. Sometimes it might be the opposite, so they may deny your answer. And then, is this good enough? I don't think this is good enough, right? So you need to keep doing this, pretty much, until you come up with a set of data that will help you do your study. Otherwise, you have to need to change your questions, right? And then, of course, as soon as you are satisfied with what you have collected, you go and start analyzing the data in depth. You compare with your baseline. You figure out if this is what is distinguishing your class of users from baseline users. But then that's good enough, right? If you want to do some sort of machine learning, you need to build some ground truth, or if you have it already collected, that's perfect. That's another story. How do you check if that ground truth is good enough or not? You also do some analysis on the ground truth labels to see if this ground truth is good and what type of distinctions are in these users. And then, of course, some feature extraction, selection, and then the machine learning can be applied. Usually these two are happening together, meaning you can have some machine learning algorithms that do the selection of your features for you. Let's say, well, you need to instrument it. But at the end of this story here, you should have a pretty good method to detect the effect you want to measure, right? And automatically, you may be able to deploy it on the web. If you are lucky and there are some sort of systems that you can compare with, that's good. How many steps do we have in this process? How many did you guys measure? You guys are not paying attention. We skipped 5, right? Anyway. Okay, so let's get into the data set collection for the particular project. We focused on Twitter for about 3 months. We collected data last year. The baseline was basically 1 million random tweets, and we collected the hate-related data set, which was constructed based on a method that I will describe in a little bit. And the main idea there was to have a data set that is collecting the behavior of a specific phenomenon. In this case, it was Gamergate. How many people know about Gamergate? Okay. Of course, we needed to go back to Twitter and record some things to enrich our data set after we did all the analysis and everything. But this was to include more data on the users' profiles, account status, and so on. And I will talk about that in a little bit. But in general, if you want to, let's say, crawl the Twitter, in this case, you can define a seed keyword. In this case, it would be Gamergate. You create a dynamic list of keywords that you update based on the tweets that you crawl from this keyword list. You keep coming up with new keywords from the tweets that you crawl. You go back and update it, etc., etc. So this keeps going on until you either run out of space or you decide that you had enough data and you go back and you do your sanity checks. Also, the random sample of data as a baseline, as I said, to have a comparison. Keywords that you can use, we used Gamergate. How many people know Pizzagate? Pizzagate. I don't know if I should describe it now, but anyway, it's Pizzagate is a conspiracy theory that was going around the elections last year in the US, and it involved Hillary Clinton, senators, other politicians from the Democratic Party, that they were involved in, let's say, sexual contact and stuff like that with kids that was happening in a pizza place. And also they were doing sacrifices, and Savas knows a little bit more about this. But so this was obviously something that started from the dark web, like 4chan and Reddit and so on, and it evolved into something real, in the sense that it was picked up by the regular media, not the alternative media. And just to give the example of how this type of behavior manifests in the real world, there was a person who actually believed them, and they took the shotgun and they went to the pizza place and they started shooting people because they wanted to close the ring of perpetrators that were involved in the Pizzagate. So you start with something very stupid and very like, what the hell? And you move into something that, you know, is killing people. So and this moved really fast, right? The whole Pizzagate conspiracy theory lasted only, what, a few months, right? So it's not something, as I said, it's transient, right? It evolves really quickly. Anyway, so this kind of, let's say, hashtags or topics can be used as seed for your crawling. Black Lives Matter, I'm pretty sure everybody heard this movement that has been going on for the last couple of years in the US. And of course, you can use some extra help, let's say, from databases like Headbase or some other cursed list, or there are some negative lists. Now, of course, yeah, at the time T1, you have only these seeds that you feed your system. Then you keep updating this list based on the keywords that you detect from the crawler. You extract the top, I don't know if I have it here. At time TI, you decide that you have these top keywords that you have seen in the body of tweets that you have at the moment. And you use this new list for the next, so this was in the previous time period. And then in the next time period, you use this keyword list to crawl the new set. And you keep updating this until you decide that you collected enough data for your analysis. Now back to the Gamergate. Basically, it was a controversy that started a couple of years ago. It started from basically an ex-boyfriend of a developer, Zoe Quinn, who was arguing with her and basically insulting her on his post and so on. And this was picked up by the let's say the underground web, and they started trolling her, assaulting her on the web. Then there were constantly more and more people involved in this controversy. Eventually, it created like camps of people that were hating this type of behavior, and the other ones that were supporting it, right? At this point, it still exists. Imagine after 2 years, this hashtag is still very, very active, and it kind of represents the manifestation of this problem, right? You have a very simple, let's say, thing that was happening between a couple that evolved into something that involves thousands and thousands of people, that polarizes them around sexism, about feminism, and it primarily happens on Twitter. It happens also in other media using this Gamergate hashtag, but primarily it's on Twitter. So we used it as an example, as a nice use case to collect such, let's say, hateful or hate-related tweets. And the funny thing, or maybe not, is that when we published these works, we also got picked up by the Gamergate controversy, and they created threads for us. They started trolling us. They started posting on Twitter about us. So it is interesting how, this monster, which it could be Gamergate or it could be another controversy, will react quickly as soon as you poke it, right? As soon as you start measuring it, things evolve very interestingly. So about data pre-processing, we had those data sets I mentioned. We did some cleaning, removal of stop words, URLs, some punctuation marks, removal of repetitive characters. For spam removal, we applied something fairly simple, which had to do with removing tweets that have too many hashtags, with the thought that if you have too many hashtags, it means that you're either posting a product and you're trying to attract people by poking them with the hashtags, or you're just kind of repeating some messages that you have seen and you're trying to disseminate them in these hashtags. Or duplications. In fact, this is even more prominent on spamming, meaning you will see the same messages posted again over time, and usually are spamming activities. So we removed the tweets with more than 5 hashtags. The ones that have very high similarity, about 5% of the users were removed. I think it was 0.8. So eventually we had about 660,000 tweets related to Gamergate and 1 million random tweets for the comparison. Any questions so far? I'm going to start getting into the analysis. Yes? No? Good. Okay, so if you try to compare these Gamergate users with just random users on the web, on Twitter, sorry, we did this analysis with these dimensions. Emotional characteristics, like sentiment, emotions, offensiveness, etc., and activity characteristics from their accounts, like how much they post, the followers that they have, and so on. Okay, so emotional characteristics, for example, how many emoticons they include in their messages, how much they use uppercase, how many people know CDF, the cumulative distribution function, as a way to show. So on the x-axis we have the number of it's a number of measures that you're showing here. And here you have the cumulative portion of how much this appears. So I'll just pick an example. For example, over here, this point here, if it's, let's say, 5, it means that 80% of the users had 5 or less of this label, right? So here is uppercases, which means that you would see how many times the users would have uppercase used in their tweets, and if it's 5, it means that they had 5 or less. So Gamergate and Baseline, if you compare them, they use more or less emoticons in the same way. However, you would expect that in such a controversial topic that has to do with sexism, with feminism, etc., you would expect a lot of uppercase tweets. And yet, we see that the Baseline users are actually using it more. What does that mean, though? Maybe the Gamergaters don't feel the need to impose themselves that much, because maybe they have the support of their buddies, right? So they post something, they will retweet it, so there is this effect of community, let's say, around them. Regarding sentiment, emotion, offensiveness, so I'm showing some results here. Sentiment, we have seen that Gamergaters are using more negative tweets. They use more hate words based on this hate-based database. They are less happy, which is perhaps, maybe it makes sense because they post messages that are not very, they're not very happy. So And we have seen we didn't see any so much change on anger, disgust, fear, etc. So they're less joyful, but they are not necessarily angry, right? So they are not speaking all caps. They are not expressing anger, but their messages are, let's say, more pessimistic or more sad. They do own accounts that are very old, which is very surprising to us. Somebody would expect that Gamergaters appeared when the phenomenon appeared, when the conspiracy started, and yet what we discover is that they are basically users that were in the web on Twitter basically for a while, and they just got caught up in the controversy, and they are basically regular users who found a way to express their controversial ideas, right? They are basically older than an average user on Twitter, and they have posted, of course, maybe that makes more sense. They have posted much more messages on Twitter than an average user. Similarly, when they post something with less number of, so with more mentions within their posts, which probably means that they are targeting specific people, right? They don't put that many hashtags, as far as I remember, but they put a lot of mentions, which means direct attacks, right? And we have seen that when we publish the work, they would post tweets against us, and they would mention each one of us individually, right? With our tweet handlers, yeah. So it's a way to put pressure on the specific people that you mention in a direct way. So I think it cannot be done differently. They also have more friends and followers than a random user. Yeah, more favorites and topical lists. So the reason why I mention all these things is because I'm trying to establish that these are not peripheral users, right? They are not users that are just existing on the outskirts of Twitter, and they just show up once in a while and they post things and then disappear. They are embedded in Twitter, right? They are core members of Twitter. They have been in Twitter for a while, more than the average user. They post a lot of messages. They are very active, which lends the question, why are they still in Twitter? Why are they banned, right? We'll come back to that later. Now, I talked about ground truth earlier. The idea, any questions so far? Maybe, no? So if you want to build a classifier, if you want to build an automatic system based on machine learning that will automatically decide if something is true or false, or if it's something A, B, or C, and so on, you need some ground truth that will help you train your system. To do that, traditionally, we would grab the piece of paper, we go to the colleague, ask them, what do you think about this? Then we go to somebody else, you ask them over there, and so on. This would be a traditional interview survey kind of studies, right? But it cannot scale. If you want to study something that is big, it cannot scale like that. Also, if it's happening on the web, it also doesn't scale easily. So we used something that is, let's say, more handy at this point because of these crowdsourcing platforms. Jonas talked about this the other day, and I think plenty of us have been using them for a while now, like Amazon Turk, Crowdflower, and so on. These are platforms that basically allow you to poll the crowd for a survey, for some questions, for a testing of a tool or whatever. They give you some feedback, and they get paid. some small money or a lot of money depending on the task. Lots of things to consider when you do this type of tasks. How do you design the UI of the survey? How do you collect this feedback? How do you select the reviewers that are going to do this task? Where they come from, if you trust them. How do you do your cleaning based on what metrics? How much you pay them? If you are using a lot of parameters in this data set analysis, maybe you need to tune some of these before you show them to the crowd workers, and the list goes on. I didn't even touch the surface. So we basically used Crowdflower, but before I get there, let me just say a couple of things how we prepared the data. So if you try, as I said earlier, when you try to detect cyberbullying, it's something that is more repetitive, right? So how do you detect something that's happening regularly, and it has, let's say, some fingerprints, some signature on Twitter? Any thoughts on how you would do it? Any ideas? So imagine that you are on Twitter and you want to detect cyberbullying. How would you do, like, how would you organize your data? If you are a crowd worker, let me rephrase it. If you are a crowd worker and you want to be seen, you want to be shown something to decide if something is cyberbullying or not, how would you do it?
How would I identify my data?
Yeah.
How would I be able to know that this is cyberbullying?
Well, how do you organize the data to show them to the user who will tell you, okay, this is cyberbullying? Yeah.
Maybe bring some keywords and discuss what these keywords in
The keywords, and you will what?
if you said you can bring some keywords that that are not good and interest from these keywords.
What about the problem of sarcasm, or the problem of I'm writing A and I mean B, and it's not captured from the keyword list per se, right? It's a start, right? You can start with that, but you will quickly realize that you are cutting out a lot of material that you shouldn't, right? So one, let's say, method that has been used in the past by other researchers on Instagram and Ask.fm and so on, involved the idea of provide a set of posts to the user, this crowd worker, which will reveal enough context around a situation to enable them to understand, all right, this is cyberbullying, or this is aggression, just aggression, or this is just normal, yeah. No. I'm not even talking about the machine learning part. I'm just talking about, you are designing the interface. You want to show that to the crowd workers. How do you present this information to give them enough information so that they are equipped to make a decision, right? Because you have to think about it. If you have some budget, some money, and you need to spread it wisely among the crowd workers, you want to get the best results possible, right? Maybe you can afford to fix some things and then repeat it, but you cannot keep doing that forever, right? So you have to be smart on how do you organize your data and how do you get the best possible answers without losing your money. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Some posts, and then they ask the workers to classify actually these posts as cyberbullying or something else. Then maybe you can ask the workers to give why it's cyberbullying by
Okay.
using weak words or
select.
What's the value
Right, right.
of the meaning of
Yeah.
actually in the word. So you can make a database, a data set.
On the responses.
Yeah, it's going to be maybe one idea how to have
Yeah.
create data set.
So, yeah, that's a good point. And I'm asking you guys because we are rerunning things now. Despina and I were attending this meeting yesterday, and we are trying to figure out some other things that are coming up through this process of what type of labels do you give the crowd workers, what do they select, why, etc. So this is an open problem, right? In this work, what we did was this, which I will explain now, but I'm trying to give you some hints that it's not a clear-cut case. Okay, this is what you do, right? You can study some research and see what others have done. If it worked for them, fair enough. But maybe you can come up with something even better, right? So always keep that in mind. So what we did is basically, okay, you have a train of tweets per user, and we need to figure out if this user is a cyberbully, right? Cyberbully or not, or cyber aggression type of person, or just a normal user, right? So the way you would do it, at least what we did here, was to take this time series of tweets and break it down into what we call sessions. Okay, how do you do that? We applied basically this inter-arrival model, which checks when a tweet came and how much time it took from the previous tweet of the same user. And if this inter-arrival time is larger than a threshold that you define, you put it into a new window. If it's smaller, you put in the previous window. In this way, you create these windows or sessions, right? These chunks, right? And you assume that during this period of inactivity, let's say, the user was doing something else, they logged out of Twitter, whatever, right? But semantically, these tweets are probably closer than these ones, and so on. Now, this is a typical sort of methodology that people use to break down a series of events that the user is creating. It could be web browsing, it could be anything. And how do you group them, how do you cluster them, so that you can analyze within each of these sessions, right? Yeah? It can be, yeah. It can totally be. So at this point in time, you have no idea what's going on here. You just cluster them based on the arrival of the tweet, the time, right? What you make this assumption is if this inter-arrival time is very, very small, you are probably going to create too many sessions, but probably the ones that you put into these sessions, the tweets I mean, are of high probability to be related, right? The bigger this inter-arrival time is, the smaller the number of windows you create, and the more diversity is going to happen, right? So let me give you an example. If this inter-arrival time, is, let's say, one day, or even worse, let's say 1 week, right? It means that I am forcing my system to select all the tweets and put them into one bucket, into one session. And they need to be distinguished from the next one by 1 week. It means that for 1 week I was doing nothing, right? I was not posting anything here. Now, of course, I would expect that in this session, I would have probably a lot of activity for different topics, right? But if I change this threshold and I do it in, I don't know, 1 minute, I will create a lot of these sessions, and most likely I will have 1 or 2 tweets. I don't know how many you would post, what's your rate. But most likely this would be very, very related to each other. But they're going to be very small, right? So maybe you don't get enough context. I think the keyword here is context, right? Now, if these are too big, you can break them down. again, we needed to define a threshold for this inter-arrival time, and also a threshold for what we would call enough context or a batch of tweets within these sessions to provide to the crowd workers enough context for them to decide if I see these 5 tweets, one after the other, from the same user within this time window, is that an aggressive behavior? Is that a bullying behavior? Okay. We tried manually, and that's one of the let's say the disadvantages of this kind of method. We tried different values. We selected one that appeared to have enough, it was distinguishing enough these clusters. And also, we ran a few crowdflower campaigns to test different batch sizes, which means enough context to the workers to decide if something is aggressive or not. So 5 to 10, and 5 to 20. As you realize, 5 to 20 means that if I'm a crowd worker, I may see up to 20 tweets from the same user within a time window, and it can be very very heavy as a task, right? To understand if something is cyberbullying or not. Eventually, we found out that 5 to 10 is it gives better results. This was the UI that Despina so nicely designed. Basically, you would show if we had some profile description. No, I think we removed that, right? Yeah, because of privacy reasons for the users, etc. But you show some of the tweets that you have, right? You give the crowd worker a selection of labels that they can decide to pick. Normal spammer, bullying user, or aggressive user. You give some descriptions, and you also give some examples so that the users have an idea of what's showing, how do they, how to select, yeah. In this study, yeah. At first, we were revealing everything about the user, profile details, photos, etc., etc. But because of issues with the legals of Telefonica, and if we are going to be in trouble with Twitter and so on, they told us to remove them. So that's another story of side effects of such studies. In the end, we basically asked the crowd workers to annotate activity of 1,300 users and almost 9,500 tweets coming from these users. And the distribution of how the crowd workers decided these labels was about a little bit less than 2/3 normal users, about 1/3 spammers, and about 8% of aggressive or bullying behavior with this breakdown. And this number actually was very close to other studies that have looked into other, let's say, bad behavior, aggressive behavior, or whatever on the web, not on Twitter, let's say, but on other platforms like Yahoo Answers or online gaming and so on. So yeah. Yes, actually I forgot to say that. You definitely need to get enough votes per tweet, or in our case per batch, to make a decision if something is or not a label, right? So to be on the point, this example, for example, would have been shown to 5 different crowd workers who would be asked to pick, what does that mean is that if you get 5 times by a bullying user, it means that you have 5 votes for this specific user that they were probably acting as bullies, right? or aggressive and so on. You could also have a distribution of these things, right? So you could have 5 votes that were distributed across aggressive, bully, spammer, normal, like 1112, for example, right? If you get this type of distribution or breakdown, it means that you don't have agreement. And to make our study from this point on, we selected the ones that we have a majority of vote of a specific label. Okay, is that clear now? Yeah. All right, so let's get into the feature extraction. Okay, so we studied basically the cyber bullies and cyber aggressors as they were defined by these crowd workers versus some regular users, so how they could compare on these different dimensions, right? So we have some specific characteristics of the user with respect to activity, like as I said earlier, posts, account over the age of the account, how frequently the messages come, and so on. Textual related features like sentiment, hashtags, mentions, and so on. And network related features, which we were the first to use them, right? As far as I remember. So these are. Yeah. Well, popularity is very easy, let's say, to use from Twitter. It's just a number. What we did was compute a lot of other features that come from the social network of Twitter. Reciprocity is something that counts how likely you are to reciprocate the relationship that you have with somebody on Twitter, to reciprocate it back, right? So if somebody is following you, if you're following them back. Average power difference, which means what's the difference between the ratio of friends to followers that you have versus your friends, the ones that you are connected with. Hubs and authority, these are more centrality related features. Eigenvector centrality is a more, let's say, cascade based centrality. Closeness, which reflects how close you are to others based on the shortest path distance from one point to another, from one user to another. And community-based features like clustering coefficient around the network of a user, and communities detected based on the Louvain method. And so I will not show all of these, of course. I'll just pick a few. With respect to user and textual features, like, for example, number of lists, hashtags, what we saw was that the normal users were signing up to more lists than the aggressors or spammers or bullies, which was, I guess, interesting. It means that this type of breakdown of users into labels, so not just Gamergaters, but the Gamergaters into something more distilled, they start becoming less important, right? They're not as active as a normal user. However, they use a lot of hashtags. As I mentioned earlier, I don't know if you guys remember, they use a lot of hashtags, which is, I guess, an attempt to disseminate their message into different groups of people, because nowadays hashtags reflect groups, right? So I may put I hate Black Lives Matter, and this message will be seen by everybody who is subscribed to see the updates from Black Lives Matter hashtag. So one post from me could affect, in a sense, a lot of people, this group. Similarly, how many URLs they were using. Normal people are not using so many URLs, which was interesting. We see the bullies are using a lot of these URLs. We are theorizing that it could be that they are attempting to attract attention to these URLs, because keep in mind that if you are an aggressor and you want to harm somebody who posted something on a website or so on, you could point to where this is by just posting the URL and posting it on Twitter and then including some hashtags that will attract attention to this URL, right? And before I mention raids, this is one of the means that they are using to disseminate where people should be attacking, right? So they post the URL. It's a clear indication of where you should be going. So if I'm following you and you are the leader of Gamergate, let's say, it's a clear indication that I need to go to this website and start harassing them, right? Sentiment, obviously, or maybe not obviously, I don't know, aggressive people were using more negative sentiment. Interestingly, the bullies were not so negative, right? So it's a subtle way of how you can do, you can bully somebody. You can use totally non-negative words, non-hateful words, and still be harassing somebody. And this is what is picking up here. On the network features, so I mentioned a couple of these definitions. I will skip them, I think, for now, unless somebody is into network analysis. I can explain more. But okay, if you look at the friends and followers, for example, friends, you will see that normal users are more embedded in the network of Twitter than the ones that we are talking about, like aggressors and bullies. Sorry. But they're still. It's interesting that they still have a lot of friends. It's not like they are pariahs. It's not like they're in periphery, right? They still have, which is, for me, it was surprising from the beginning. Reciprocity-wise, so what this tells us, so as I said, reciprocity is telling you basically how much people like you back, right? How much they want to follow your updates. And look at the bullies. The bullies are reciprocating relationships much more than normal people, and aggressors a little bit less, but still much higher than normal people. What does that tell us is that these type of people are really clustered together, right? They really like to engage into these pairwise relationships and support each other, right? So if you post something and I see that I like your behavior, I will follow you, you will follow me back. I will post something, so it's a constant feedback that we give to each other that we are doing something really cool, and it's great, yeah. Yeah, but I agree, but it's something that you need to take into account when you are trying to detect this behavior.
Really, people can engage to this recently, they are also doing so.
Come again? Sorry.
People can engage to bullying tweets or aggressive tweets are probably they are aggressive and because of that. So you can find one or 10 bullies, you can find from their network another one.
Yeah. So that is kind of like the next steps we want to investigate, in fact. A side note, on Twitter it's not so easy to crawl the network to begin with. It became very difficult nowadays, especially with the limitations they impose on API to crawl. And if you hit any of these popular accounts that have thousands and thousands of followers and friends, to crawl them, it's very difficult. So it takes a lot of time, right? And why do I say that? Is because what you're proposing is a network-based detection method, which means that you need to have already constructed the full network of Twitter, and then place these guys in the network, and then trace the network around them, and keep expanding until you come up to a decent amount of true positives, right? so it's definitely one method that we want to explore. That was my original thoughts, but then you hit the barrier of Twitter and how much they allow you to crawl, and it becomes very difficult. But just to close the reciprocity point, you would expect that this is happening in the group called I Love Kittens, for example, right? Yeah, you like something that I like, I follow you, you follow me, you post something, whatever. But when it comes to something like bad behavior, like bullying, you don't know if this is happening, right? You need to investigate it first to understand if this is actually the case. And for me, it was surprising because I would expect these people to be in their corners, right, in their underground basements or whatever of the physical world and of the online world, right? And that they would appear once in a while to just wreak havoc and then disappear again. And yet it's exactly the opposite, at least in Twitter, right? So centrality-wise, normal people are more central. But that's where things, for example, aggressive people here, they are much more central and closer to normal than the bullies, right? Which means that they are embedded in the network and they are allowed to do this aggressive behavior without being stopped. Similar here with the cluster cohesion, which shows how well connected your one-hop neighborhood is with you and with each other. The formation of triads, etc. We can discuss it offline if you want. But what you see here is that aggressive users are either equally or even more clustered with each other than normal users. I'll skip this time. Let's get into the machine learning part. So all these things that I mentioned earlier were basically features, were characteristics, properties that can be used within either a very basic machine learning algorithm or a very complicated one to detect, to train it and detect if something is cyberbullying or cyber aggression or normal behavior. And we did these two, let's say, phases. One is we used the 4 classes that we had earlier, assuming that we had spamming as well detected. And then, based on these labels as spam, we removed all the tweets and the users that were marked as spammers, as if we had a very, very, very good spam detection algorithm that removed these guys before we would do anything. So in this case, we would have 3 classes, right? The bully, aggressive, and normal. For this, we used Weka. The dataset was not that big to play with any other libraries at this point. We did a tenfold cross-validation repeated to get some averages on the scores. And after several different classifiers, random forest was performing the best. And it's actually a nice algorithm because it gives you some intuition of it builds a tree, right? It's a forest of trees, so it is also more explainable than, let's say, SVMs or anything else. And we look at precision recall, accuracy, area under the ROC, and so on. And the results basically show that, I will just talk about the overall and some cases. This is for the four classes case, and this is for the 3 classes case. Overall, we get about 81, 82% area under the curve, with a fairly good, almost 72%, 73% precision recall for across all classes, which is it's it's a good result in the sense that it's an encouraging result. Now we're investigating neural networks, and we're trying to come up with a more advanced method to see if we can improve the scores. Interestingly, when you assume that all the spammers that were marked by the users would have been detected by us beforehand, and you remove them, and you go into these three classes, then you get even better score, right? So almost 90% precision recall, more than 90% area under the curve. So if you're a trader and you apply this kind of method, and you already have, let's say, a really cool, a really exceptional spam detection method, and you are just interested in these labels, so bully, aggressive, or just let it pass, you could do fairly well. And this is interesting, right? So not textual. Remember what we said earlier, that you can be misled by the keywords? The user and the network-based features were more informative of the process. So the textual, it can help. We didn't remove them, but they were not in the top features. I think I have it here, yeah. So you see the friends, reciprocity, the followers. So the network structure, it gives a lot of information to the algorithm to decide if somebody is a bully or not. And then, yeah, some behavior of how people post. All these things, so I forgot to mention that, all these things were done, trained and tested with what we call unbalanced data sets. So if you remember the breakdown of normal spammers and aggressive people, the aggressive were about 8% in total, which brings us to an unbalanced data set problem, right? It means that, so let me ask you this, if in case you can't think about it. What would be a very simple classifier to do with such a data set that would perform really, really high in accuracy? So we have 92% normal or spammers, and 8% aggressive behavior, bully or aggressive. Sava? Yeah. The majority level, right? So what do? You always predict that somebody is a normal, right? In this case, you would be 92% accurate, right? Is that good enough? No, right? Because you are missing the 8%, and that's what you really care about. You would be 8% wrong, but that's what you really care about. So you cannot do this naive, what we call a naive classifier, right? And that's the problem of when you have really a minority level, and you need to come up with another method. And this is where we did some data balancing. You grab the majority level, you undersample it, and then you grab the minority level and you oversample it, right? And you kind of try to bring the two classes with a balance, right? What does that mean is that it gives more opportunity to the classifier to learn more about this minority level, this minority class, that it didn't have enough data to learn before. Of course, these scenarios, you have to treat them with caution, because what you are ending up doing, for example, if you use smooth or resampling methods, for example, you are basically reproducing some of the instances that you have seen in your minority level, so that you increase the count, right? The count, which means that you're giving similar or the same information to your classifier. That's where it gets tricky, right? You have to be cautious on how you apply it. And you can break it down into a portion of training and testing. this 10% testing, as far as I remember, it was unbalanced, right? Yeah. So in this case, basically, you build this 90% training data set with a balancing scheme, and then you test this classifier on a 10% unbalanced, which means this was not seen by your classifier, and it maintains the original distribution of your data. If it performs really well in this 10%, it means that your balancing scheme helped your classifier to perform better, right? Sorry. And the scores, they are a little bit less than before. So if you remember here, it was 90%, but we are still doing very good. And I think the accuracy went up a little bit. All right, so to close up, I have some slides on how Twitter performs this suspension or whatever you want to call it. So on Twitter, basically, you are allowed to delete your account, right? And they may suspend you as well if they see some activity from you that is not following the terms and conditions. Okay, so the deleted is an action that comes from the user. The suspension is an action that comes from the system. Okay, of course, we don't really know how Twitter selects accounts to suspend them, and we don't know why users select the option to delete their account. Some thought would be, okay, if I get bullied, I may delete my account, right? And this is what actually happened to a lot of popular people like actors and so on. When they get bullied by the web, they delete their account or they go inactive, right? They disappear. If you are a bully, maybe you get suspended if you get detected, right? If you are a spammer, maybe you are suspended. So it's some ambiguity there. Who is doing what and under what conditions? So we had this analysis on what are the characteristics of users that get suspended or they delete their accounts, and how they compare these characteristics. And if we can, let's say, emulate, or if we can replace the Twitter engine with our engine to make these detections. So surprisingly, so this is a breakdown of, remember the baseline users that we talked about earlier and the Gamergate users? The majority of people are active. So step back. What we did was we grabbed the sample of users, about 33,000 users, and we went and tested the status of their account. So how active they are. If they are active, they're suspended. If they're deleted, right? And basically, you check the return code from the Twitter, and you realize what state they are. And what we found out was that the random users, well, in general, active are the majority in either case, right? Now, if you look at the breakdown within each group, so active, deleted, or suspended, the suspended are more than the deleted in both cases. However, the Gamergaters, they are less suspended and less deleted than the baseline, which for me is a little surprising, right? You would expect such a hate-related group, so users that are involved in this controversy, to disappear more, or to be suspended more, or to, I don't know. So this was surprising to us, and we wanted to investigate more. Some breakdowns. So, for example, anger, right? We found that the users that were suspended from Gamergate, or the other way around, users that were Gamergaters, right, and they got suspended, they expressed a lot of anger. So their tweets had a lot of anger in the message. And then the Gamergates that were deleted their accounts, were also the second highest. The baseline were much less. For sadness, right? We have Gamergaters who deleted their accounts. They were more sad, or they were posting more sad comments or messages before they deleted their accounts, right? Maybe they were being bullied, they got involved in this controversy, and at some point they decided, I'm going to delete my account. Same thing with fear, right? So the Gamergaters that deleted their accounts expressed fear in their messages. So this goes hand in hand with this too, right? With respect to joy, so we have here some other basic emotions like joy and disgust. The suspended users were expressing, for some reason, disgust in their messages. And then the next one was the deleted account. For some reason also the joy related sentiment. What we have seen earlier, but this is interesting because this is a breakdown of deleted versus suspended, is the upper cases, like how many tweets they posted with all caps, right? And we see that Gamergates that were suspended or deleted are using generally less, which means that they don't want to appear to be imposing their message. And sentiment, I think we had seen that before, and it's basically confirming what we were saying. So, a summary on this breakdown is that Gamergaters are expressing more anger and repulsive emotions and offensive language, the suspended ones, right? And we have about 30% more Gamergaters that are posting more negative tweets, but the rest are actually more positive than the regular users. So you have these two groups of Gamergaters that are either really negative and really aggressive, really repulsive, and so on. And you have the other ones, which are probably the victims, that are more positive. They're trying to they spin things around, but maybe it's not enough, right? And they eventually go to the deletion, right? So the ones that got deleted, maybe they were bullied, they were expressing anger against this behavior. They have more negative sentiment. Generally, they type less in all caps. This one, we can't skip this. And this, yeah, we have talked about this more or less. So, in general, these Gamergaters, either suspended or deleted, are more active than regular users. But the deleted users, and this is an interesting finding, is that they probably have less support from the social network. So they don't have enough followers or friends to help them or to support them in their messages. You know how you, for example, you may see some bad posting on Facebook, and then you go and follow up and you say, no, I agree with this guy, and somebody will disagree with you, and then you will take on a war against them, for example. But that's in support of the first person, right? Which means that you are providing some social structure and support to the original poster. It seems that the deleted users don't have that on Gamergate. And perhaps before they disappear, they try their best with a lot of messages and the reactions and so on, but eventually they delete their accounts. So this would be a comparison. So this would be the label that we had from the crowdsourcing platform versus the label that we got from Twitter. And what we see, so we did this, this is just two snapshots, but we had more in between. what we see, just to give you an idea, the ones that are call active, which means that they were not deleted or suspended on Twitter, they had a majority, or not majority, 67% of these bullies, were still active. 32% were deleted, and none of them were suspended. What does that mean is that a lot of the users that our crowd workers decided that they were bullies were still active, and 1/3 of them deleted their accounts on their own. So Twitter never really suspended them. Yeah.
Does Twitter have a policy rule for bullying? Does Twitter has a policy rule for bullying?
Yeah, it has very specific rules on how you post and what you post and how you conduct yourself against others, right? So cyber aggression, cyberbullying is something even more extreme than what they describe. So it's even more heavy, let's say.
Yeah, so nobody reported them as bullying.
No. It's a behavior that it can be reported. The problem is that, and we are making these assumptions that Twitter just doesn't block or doesn't ban many of these users because they are bringing a lot of activity in Twitter. And why do I say that? Is because, so this is November 2016. Okay, we have these bullies and aggressive, and you see the breakdown. The aggressive are more likely to be suspended. And our theory is that the bullies are difficult to pick up. As I said, it's a repetitive process that may happen with subliminal messages, with non-explicit language. The aggression is more of a one-time thing, right? Maybe it's easier to pick up and suspend automatically, or perhaps from a human annotator. But you still have some people that delete their accounts, and more or less the same portion that are still active. Now, going back a few months later, when you recall, over here, we noticed that Twitter was already making announcements for a new platform service that they are going to be detecting bad behavior, and this aggression will not go on forever, and we'll need to stop it, etc., etc. So they started releasing some tools internally, right? Not to researchers or anything like that. And we saw, you see a higher portion of aggressive users being suspended, a higher portion deleted, which is a self-action, right? Still, you are not getting bullies, right? And you have the normal users which are could be false negatives in here. So bottom line here is that you can do better if you are Twitter, but we do have the question, why don't they, right? We all know that Twitter, even though they have been around for many years, they haven't picked up as Facebook, so they probably have allowed such behaviors to happen because they allow traffic to come in Twitter, and now they are trying to catch up. We have lots of examples of celebrities and so on that got bullied and they deleted their accounts and so on. These are things that become more and more popular as aggressive behavior, let's say. And I think Twitter, if they want to continue making business, they will probably need to address this soon. And as I said, the last few months they've been announcing constantly things that they are doing to block such behavior. So just to summarize a couple of things and close, we have seen basically this aggressive behavior of users happening in bursts. It's basically a quick interval time of messages from these guys. They are long appearing on Twitter, so they're not young accounts. They are less likely to be popular on the web, on the network, but bullies, the aggressive people, are actually more embedded than bullies. They don't participate in main communities. The aggressive ones do. Aggressors are more difficult to get identified from classifiers, which means that we can see maybe the cyberbullying behavior being something more unique. So if you're going to catch it, you're going to catch it. But the aggressive behavior is not so easy to pick on. We did see, that's something I didn't mention, aggressive and bullying behavior. It was kind of a confusing label for the crowd workers, and we saw a lot of overlap on how they annotate, or rather how our classifier performs when it tries to distinguish between these two labels. Yeah, and with respect to Twitter, we are remaining with the question: why don't they ban this kind of behavior if you can detect it? Some things that I mentioned earlier that I'm working on about this topic. So we're trying to understand the difference between this type of labels on Twitter, how the news propagate on these platforms with respect to fake news versus real news. We want to run some network analysis and topic modeling to see how they propagate. Rate, image analysis on these type of platforms, and some honeypots to see if we can reproduce such behavior to study how they are generated. If you have any ideas or if you want to collaborate, let us know. We can discuss some details. I think that's it. Thank you, guys. Any questions, or we do a break? To you guys. Thank you.